Since we have such a large group today, we'll wait just a minute to get everyone on board. But for everyone that's here with us right now, welcome to SIBC Connects, Sweden-India Business Council Connects. We have started, as a result of the current scenario we find ourselves in, a weekly webinar where we bring up relevant and pertinent questions that are in the Sweden-India corridor. We are very happy here to be talking about mobility and have with us three great panelists and experts in their fields and on the front line today for the discussion that we're having. We have with us Jakob Kiefer from ABB, Ganesh Das, Dr. Ganesh Das from Tata Power DDL. Lastly, but not least, Soma Banerjee from CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. CII is a long-term partner to SIBC. We work together not only on mobility discussions that we'll be taking up today, but also on the CEO panel between Sweden and India, the India-Sweden Business Leaders Roundtable. SIBC is a secretariat in Sweden, CII is secretariat in India. Today, we want to delve into the question of mobility and the future of our electric ambition. In December 2019, SIBC, together with the Energy Agency and the Smart Grid Forum and CII, released a report on electromobility and the opportunities in the Sweden-India corridor. On March 24th, every speculation and recommendation we made was declared null and void because our scenario has changed dramatically. Today, we get to ask our experts on the panel, what should we do now? Where do we go? And where are we coming from? I will hand over to Albin Carlen, who has been our partner in this process for the last 3 years and has actually supported our process and been our sponsor, if you like, to create the questions that we take up. But before I do that, to our audience, I'd like to have some hygiene rules. You'll see a Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. Please write your questions as we move along our discussion, who you are and who the question is addressed to, or maybe all the panel. We will take them up at the end of our panel. We are recording today's session and we'll share them with attendees that would like a recording. And lastly, we were planning for a 45-minute session, but because of the higher response we've received and the Q&As we might get in, we could very likely extend to 1 hour, so be patient with us. It's a lot to learn, a lot to take from here. With that, I hand over to Albin Carlen, Swedish Energy Agency.
Thank you, Arati. Once again, welcome everyone. I work at the Swedish Energy Agency, and we have been working hard over the last couple of years to promote collaboration in the India-Sweden space, together with SIBC and CII and many others. So we want to see more Swedish and Indian companies and stakeholders doing business and collaborating both in Sweden and in India. And we have developed a government strategy for that purpose. So we have a track record of introducing Swedish and Indian companies, both large and small. And for the smaller companies, we currently have a program running called India-Sweden Business Accelerator. And this program is a way for partnerships to happen between SMEs from Sweden and Indian companies. And we know that it leads to business, and the mobility is one of the areas that we focus very strongly on. But there are more opportunities coming here, and also this call is part of that ambition. We currently have a call lined up between the Department of Science and Technology in India and the Swedish Energy Agency, encompassing 5 million euros. So you can all stakeholders listening in, please feel free to ask questions about this call, and we will answer them after this seminar. And please use also this opportunity to gather some inspiration for the coming call. There will be activities coming for matchmaking between Swedish and Indian stakeholders, specifically on smart grids and smart mobility. So hopefully you will be able to get some inspiration here today. We will now move without further ado into content matter and let in our panelists. So as Arati correctly pointed out, we have seen changes in the past months that will throw up our strategies in the air. So we need to relate to this new reality. And we would like to hear from our panelists what they are seeing from where they are sitting right now. But before we delve into that question, I would firstly like to invite ABB and Mr. Ambassador Jakob Kiefer, who is currently Head of Government Relations and Public Affairs at ABB, and also has an impressive career behind him at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. To give your view on what is ABB's status quo, what are you doing right now? So Jakob, I know you have a presentation. Please take it away.
Sure, thank you. And in a usual circumstances, we will probably be sitting together and have more interaction. So, but this is how life has become for us. I'm actually right now outside Stockholm in the archipelago. It's raining 2 degrees, so it's a little bit being in the shining type of sense you have. But let's today start to talk about a little bit of where we were before this whole thing happened. So I'll try to share my screen here and give you my presentation to see whether that works or not. Do you see it now?
Yeah.
So basically, I just want to say what we looked at before going into the Corona and COVID-19 situation, that we were actually looking at 3 big trends when it comes to the future electrification. First, and obviously one, was digitalization. That 75% of data will actually go outside its original core. And how does this really tap into the whole business of electrification? Second mega trend is, of course, the urbanization, and we don't have in Sweden to go to Stockholm to understand what's going on. I think the ones who are experts here are the people living in India, really the country where I have so many mega cities. And what does it mean? Today we have approximately 4 billion of our global citizens living in mega cities, urban cities. In the future, 2040, it will be over 6 billion. And that has tremendous impact on the quality of life, obviously, and how we will actually gear up our cities. And then finally, the electrification. It's not like electricity is something new, but there's a new business, there's a new type of technology coming into the fore when it comes to the shift electricity. So we just, as a company in the business to business, see tremendous opportunity, but we also have to see a little bit where the electrification comes from. It's generation, it's distribution, and then I cannot see because my screen is in the way here. Let me see if we can get that. And then it's the consumption. And we are providing basically both utilities to industries, and today we are talking about transport and infrastructure. And for us, when we're doing this, we have to think about how to do this in a smart way. So we have to take all the trends and all the mega trends of digitalization, bring it to smart mobility, make it integrated, and make sure that we have decent management and charging management and consumer benefits. And in order for us to do this, we cannot do it alone anymore. There's no company in the world that is able to do this on its own. So a lot of the things that we do together with other partners. You see some of the names to the right. But I would like also to add that perhaps the most important partner for us today are governments, municipalities, governors, mayors of the big cities or cities in general. Those are the ones who really have to step up and say, this is the city that we want to live in. And then we as an industry and academia can provide this. I'm thrilled to see that we have both agencies here and representatives of governments working on this together. I think I will stop with this sign just to say a little bit of where I think the biggest challenges are right now. For us, the big question is not that these trends will disappear, but how does COVID-19 change the environment for us? Certainly it will have a toll on investment, but I also think that we're also seeing some benefits of having a little bit of quality of air, for example, in big cities. And we have seen the images coming in from India that can actually see the mountains in the big cities now that you didn't see before. Do we want to go back to that world, or do we really want to step up a little bit and take electrification forward? Because electrification is so important when it comes to building a sustainable future. But we also have to think about the global infrastructure. Where does the electricity come from? If it comes from coal-based and fossil-based, we haven't done so much. So for us, it's always a holistic system, and that's why we have to be in this together. On a final note, I'm a diplomat, born a diplomat, and I just want to praise this cooperation that we have between India and Sweden. The world is a little bit falling apart when it comes to the global institutions. A lot of fear is out there, nationalism. We also have protectionism coming into the play. And that's why this type of collaboration is so important, because if countries collaborate bilaterally and people and industry collaborate, the global world might be in a different situation, but we can still forge these ties. And why not doing a rounded project about electrification? So I just stopped there as an introduction, Arati, and also thank you to my panelists who will probably be able to give a little bit of a highlight from the Indian perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Your message and your challenge to the cities was very well received. Tell us what to do, and we will do our best to solve the challenges. And also that business must go on, and this is an opportunity as well. The situation that we have, even in spite of all the challenges. So it fits very well, actually, that our next panelist is Dr. Ganesh Das, and you are the head of collaborations at the Smart Grid Lab at Tata Power DDL. So before I hand over the word to you, just a few words on how we know each other. You are no stranger to Sweden. We met last year at the Nordic Clean Energy Week in Malmö, and you are also beyond that, you are also a scholar at the MIT and have authored numerous books. And I know that what you are most interested in is perhaps how changing technologies derives from and improves the quality of consumer life. So Ganesh, how does Jakob's presentation sit with you, and what is your perspective coming from India and one of the few private utilities in a country where energy demand has very much slumped since the lockdown started?
Thanks, Albin, and good morning, good afternoon to all. It is very interesting that what Jakob was mentioning, the first slide, it really gives a picture of the electric mobility. Essentially, if you look at, this is perhaps one of the areas where the stakeholders has got an equal stake. If you look at the consumer, if you look at the grid, if you look at the car manufacturers, or if you look at the cities or municipalities at large, it has a very strong stake in that. And very recently, it is as things would have it. In our company, we have also decided to focus on innovation and R&D, especially on the emerging areas. That is some of the areas also which I am looking at. So perhaps when I was giving a perspective of the sector, maybe I'll just give a very small, kind of a situation here. The moment after we had a lockdown, the industrial and then the commercial consumption has gone down. And today, as we speak, the total consumption, this is a kind of a peak season for us. The weather is also not bad these days. But we used to be selling a lot of units of energy. Consumption was very high. And we now have a unprecedented time wherein the average consumption has come down drastically because of the commercial and the industrial establishments. And what does it mean for companies or distribution utilities like us, which essentially operates on a very different kind of a model? It means that our average billing price cost is gone down substantially. And if you look at typically the Indian model of electricity tariffs, the domestic consumers are subsidized by the commercial and industrial consumers. So by the moment you don't have a industrial and commercial customer in place, so you actually go down from your average buying rate, and your average billing rate becomes less than the average mandate, which means you essentially start losing on every unit of energy you are selling to a domestic consumer, because it is not set off. So why I'm giving this example is, if you look at the electric vehicle tariff which has come out in some of the states, which has been very proactive, you will also find that price is also less than the average buying cost, which essentially talks about that how this model is going to take shape in the future, because when you are going to have this kind of an unprecedented time when the consumption is not going to be there, how the electric mobility from the grid perspective is going to come in. I'm not talking about the kind of stability part. and the other issues which is going to come in when the grid is going to be having this electric vehicle, load coming in. And if you look at the consumers per se, you're going to have one consumer and having two different buying behavior. The consumer, when he is buying an electric vehicle, the involvement is very high, and he looks at different things to buy the electric vehicle. And if you look at the energy consumption, the consumer is totally unconnected to the utility, in the sense that they only remember the energy, whether it is there or not there when the crisis happens. So you've got the same consumer operating in, wearing two different hats, which is something which is very critical for us to look at. And the other aspect from the grid standpoint is, the kind of, again, I'm touching up the point of cost and the kind of change of scenario which is going to come. So we have a situation where the energy is in surplus, available for generation. But at the same time, we have constraint at times on the load. So when we are going to have this electric vehicle coming in at different cities, different places, different locations where you're going to have charging infrastructure, we are going to have this challenge of how do you make the node self-sufficient to take care of all the electric vehicle, requirement of charging, etc. And how does the grid is going to interact with the different applications and address the situation of ensuring that the electric vehicles are not standard, ample power is going to happen, etc. On that. So with that bit of a background, we have in India, of course, we are trying to do electric vehicle rollout through public transportation system and also through private vehicle. And we have a substantial level of two-wheelers and three-wheelers available in India, which is not the case in other parts of some parts of the world. So we are looking at what is the kind of a charging infrastructure, pricing mechanism, everything is going to be set up for different section and the segments of the customer when we are going to have it. And when it comes to the public transportation system, there are a lot of discussion that how the public transportation system is going to shape up in the future when people are not going to, say, travel together. So of course, we will look for some sort of an innovation in this space. Some materials company which is going to come and tell that, not going to, we have got some material which is not going to attract a virus or a bacteria, things like that. So that is something which you're looking at. At the same time, if you look at another aspect is we are going to see an opportunity for a lot of vehicle which is going to just travel. It could be an autonomous vehicle, can be possibly carrying goods. Again, can the electric vehicle fit into those kind of space? And because we are also going to see a lot of delivery which is going to happen at the doorstep or at the home, at least for some time. Or at least there is a segment which is going to really creep up or come up to address this kind of a requirement. So how does this entire thing is going to matter is very important. And when you are looking at the business model per se, it is very important that we develop a business model which is not essentially looking at the typical subsidized way of doing it, but looking at what it is going to be sustainable from this point of view. And definitely technology is going to play a very big role. And the partnership with Sweden has been extremely good. And there are different partnerships which India has to look forward to look at technology, not only in terms of, having technology to really work in the Indian context, but also see that can we develop something together which will actually meet the Indian requirement. For that matter, I also had a startup, kind of an incubation center, which is called Clean Energy International Incubation Center, which is a joint initiative of Government of India and Tata Trust. We have got about 24 companies working there, startups working there. Some are in the space of electric vehicle, and in fact, all of them are in the area of clean energy. So what we are looking at is, can these companies come out with some unique kind of technology which is going to help us to address the challenge of electric mobility, and also to see that how does this gets integrated, which could be scaled, addressing the requirement of cost and things like that. So this is something which is extremely important to look at. And what we say is that electric mobility is certainly going to be important, and we are looking forward to it, and it is going to address a lot of solutions for India, and also it will help us to address some of our challenges of pollution, etc. But at the same time, how do we really go about deploying it, not only in terms of rolling it out, this to start with, but also to see that how do we develop a sustained business model which is going to address the requirement of cost and scale, and also multiplication of the same into across India and other parts of the geography. So I'll stop here. Maybe we can discuss more as we move forward.
That's a great place to stop because it leads very well into our next panelist and the comments that Soma will make. Before I hand over to Soma, I just want to introduce her and how far back we go. We also met Soma last, Albin and I, at the Nordic Clean Energy Week, but we've also met in Gotland. We met many times in Stockholm and of course many times in Delhi. Soma has been a critical part of the SIBC, Swedish Energy Agency partnership in this area, and also has been a critical part of helping us develop our strategies on both sides of the market. Soma, you have, and CII has released a white paper that you'll be talking to today, but that white paper comes after COVID. And it talks about and addresses a lot of things that Dr. Das has also raised up, the questions of how does India move forward in this difficult time? You have a lot of parameters, how utility functioning or struggling, and what does it mean for renewable energy and our electric ambition? I'm going to hand over to you, but I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through the discussion, the mega trends that Jakob actually talked about that are still relevant today, except how we mechanize them and deploy them change a little bit, which is digitization. You talk about that in your white paper. Urbanization and the role of partnerships in moving forward. That's critically at play in our discussion today during COVID and post-COVID. So what does it mean for India and what does it mean for CII as an advisor to the government? What recommendations are you putting forward?
Thank you very much, Arati. Thank you, Albin, and a very good afternoon to all panelists and everybody who's joined the session today. It's a very interesting subject, very interesting topic, and I'm glad to be a part of this. So as Arati said, our partnership with Sweden and particularly the Sweden-India Business Council goes back quite some time now. We've been in each other's countries. I've been really fortunate to go to places in Sweden which not many people within Sweden go to, like Gotham, and many others like that. And I really think that it's a piece of Sweden that I carry with me and in our work in CII. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak and to share my thoughts on this platform, along with others who have joined this platform. You heard the earlier speakers, both Jakob and Ganesh, and I think they've given you a good picture of what COVID has done. And my thoughts really are going to be centered around the disruption that COVID has brought into our lives. Actually, it's interesting. When we talked about electric vehicles, when we started talking about electric vehicles, particularly through the Sweden-India Business Council, I think about a year back when we were working through the states, we talked of EVs as the disruption. We talked of how EVs are going to bring about the disruption in India's transportation sector. It's strange today that we are going to talk of a different kind of disruption, which is going to disrupt the EV story in India. So, it's in a way a disruption within the disruptive story that we were looking at. As we know, world over, transportation is one of the big elements for any economy as to how you really go about making changes in your fuel, in making changes as far as energy security, in making changes as far as clean air. So it has several angles to it. And India was no stranger. It was also just about beginning the churn as far as electric vehicles is concerned. And here, the necessity was more triggered, I would say, by the pollution in our cities. And we really needed to move away from fossil fuel into electric vehicles. Now, there was, of course, a debate, what if electric vehicles are charged by coal-based power plants? And so are we really moving away from fossil fuel? Well, yes, that's a debate for another day, but we were trying to at least move away from liquid fuels of crude and move into a more cleaner fuel, which was electric vehicles, the way they use, etc. So we just about got it started. States have started coming out with their policies. We've done about 11 states, I think, had come out with their policies. And it was really going good. And the basic principle for people who did not know, so I'll just repeat it in half a second. The basic principle for electric vehicles in India was about shared mobility. So you basically do not really encourage personal vehicles, but you encourage more of Ubers, Olas, buses, etc. So more people are transported through the electric mobility solutions. Also, it was about something which states would adopt for their vehicles. So you would see more of those in our public systems, So that was the whole idea of how to really push through electric vehicles in India when we started off. And as I said, it was going fine. But it had also challenges. Challenges number one of grid stability, as Ganesh has said, because this needs a lot of stability at the load dispatch centers, at the grids, as to how you're going to manage the charging, whether the charging will be done during peak hours, will it be done during night hours, will it be happening at the residential complexes, will it be happening at the city marketplaces, at airports. All these things were still being debated, laid out, and some of the charging stations had come already in place. I had the fortune of visiting Sweden and seeing their charging stations, which is miles apart from what we have. But work had begun. Work had begun in good earnest, and we were really going strongly on that till COVID hit us. And as we know, COVID is something which we did not know anything about, which we don't know how we're going to far ahead with, because it really is at this moment something which is quite unknown, which is not really giving us a line of sight. Yes, we hear some good news about vaccines being developed, but how it's really going to transform businesses is something which we have to see. And I think even if you have a vaccine, it is making businesses rethink on their strategies, for sure. How do you source your raw material? How do you have your supply chains? How do you look at markets? Every business is today looking into this, including how do you get your staff to work. Many of us who are used to going to work every day, unlike some of the sectors who can manage to do so, are now actually looking at whether we will need to go to work every day and whether we will work out of home. And what does a work out of home mean? It means less need for vehicles. So will that put a question mark on the electric vehicle as well? So I'm going to show you just 2-3 slides to give you a picture of where we are. And okay, is that clear? So if you see, Ganesh referred to this, which is basically the whole thing of how the lockdown has played off. And you can see over here that just within the lockdown period, you see a demand reduction, or I would call it a demand destruction of 25 to 30%, which is huge, which is really huge. And don't forget, this is coming in the summer months. We've seen an overall demand impact of around 50 to 60 gigawatts in peak demand, which is phenomenally big. A decline in daily demand of 0.7 to 1 billion units, and a decline in demand over 21 days or 19 to 21 days of 35 billion units. The daily demand in the week of 9th March, which is when we were just about beginning with the lockdown, was 3.3 billion units. And the daily demand in the first week of the first 3 weeks was 2.6 to 2.8 billion units. So one was about COVID as such, but I think India has a peculiar story because we've really gone for the strictest amount of lockdown, which was the only option left for a country like India, which really doesn't have that much of a infrastructure to deal with the health problems. We come to the next slide now, and here you can see a very nice picture of how the demand has fallen. It has fallen by almost, it has actually gone up by 24% in residential. Remember, we are all sitting in homes, so the residential demand has gone up. Commercial has gone down by almost 70 to 80%. 9%, which means the lockdown impact is 70 to 80%. Industrial demand actually comprises 42% of the total demand, which has gone down by 40 to 50%. So almost zero industrial demand. Agriculture, which comprises 18%, has also gone down by 20%. And others are more or less same. The railways also have gone down because remember, passenger trains are not plying. If you look now at the impact of this, the distribution companies, which happens to be the weakest link in India's power system, is seeing an additional impact of a loss of 25,000 to 30,000 crores. And the liquidity crunch, so these distribution companies have to keep going to the banks to get money, is increased by 50,000 crore. And overdue payments, that is the payments the distribution companies have to pay to generation companies, has gone up now to 25,000 crore when it comes to thermal plants and 10,000 crore when it comes to renewable plants. So under these circumstances, when generation companies do not get paid and therefore have to cut back on their generation, not only because they don't get paid, but also because the demand has got disrupted. How do you think we're going to do balancing the grid? How are we going to maintain voltages? How are we going to stabilize it? And this demand destruction may not come back in a jiffy. India has been going through an economic slowdown, and now, as per the projections given by IMF and the rest, the world is going to go through a slowdown for some time. So it would take about 1 or 2 years at least, 1 year at least, before economy starts looking up. And if that is so, then what happens to power demand? As we all know, the power demand is directly correlated to the growth in the economy. Once the economy slows down, demand from power also comes down. And then we come to the next question: what does it do for transport electrification strategy here? This is what I was referring to earlier, that the strategy itself of having shared mobility, of having public transportation itself may undergo a change. So these were the things I had mentioned: electricity, shared and public transport. Do we look at private vehicles? How do we address affordability, and what happens to really the entire philosophy of having city congestion? Now, so these are some of the thoughts I wanted to leave, and I really don't have answers. These are more of questions, because I think people on the panel as well, others may have some very good answers to this. But let me tell you, the disruption that has happened because of COVID and the lockdown, I'm talking of COVID almost like a synonym with the lockdown as is in the country in India, is making everybody rethink their policy. I don't think any city administration or state administration which was looking at placing orders for electric buses are going to do that now. They have other priorities that are there on top of the mind. It is about creating demand at this point. It is about getting the economy going at this mind. So we will need to think of how are we going to really reposition this, which is a necessity as far as pollutions are concerned. By the way, pollutions, you have never seen such blue skies in Delhi or Mumbai for years together. You know, it's all because, like what Ganesh says, cars are not on the street, and therefore the pollution levels are down. So we have to see now, is that what we are really looking at? But maybe that's not an answer. The other thing which I just wanted to stop, maybe end with is, you know, I've already started getting inquiries from urban air mobility guides. I mean, they are there. They want to start off their services of chopper services, which can cart people, which can do your religious tourism, to do your adventure tourism, to, you know, all those things which we were thinking that probably EVs are going to come and do. So, and they give you the same kind of things. The only question is, are they going to be affordable? Which is the question for also EVs. Can we bring it down? Can we bring the price point down to a fact which will be affordable for general people and not just the state governments?
I'm going to jump in some. I think that's actually exactly the question I wanted to ask. And you will have to answer, even though you say that you're asking the questions, not answering them. But we had a pre-panel chat on Friday. And one of the points that was a little bit contentious that was raised is that we are in a time of unprecedented imbalance. Sweden and India are very different in how we've dealt with the corona crisis in terms of lockdown, like you say, in terms of economic impact that it's had. The focus has been in both countries, healthcare and taking care of communities. But you raised a point in that pre-panel discussion that I would like to ask the panel to comment on in relation to where you stand and what you're doing on the ground, because there are some differences of opinion. You said electric is a luxury today. And that's what you're saying today as well. We have to create a balance from the Indian perspective. Now, we have international commitments that we've made, both countries, both governments. How do we go forward with that balance? The global commitment to the national balance. I'm not going to start with you, Soma. I'm actually going to turn to Jakob at ABB, and then Ganesh, and then back to you.
Well, thank you, Soma, and I certainly understand where you're coming from when it comes to the issue of luxury, and I think that's a debate everybody's having around the dinner table with your kids. I mean, what is a luxury when you talk about the climate and the future of the world? So I think if you look at it from that point of view, it can't be a luxury, but there are a number of really difficult issues to be solved in relationship to the immediate situation, and I think EV is a lot about economies of scale, like every new technology. The first 200,000 or 300,000 electric cars are really expensive, and then with time, and with new type of producing things, it will decrease in price. But there are still a number of issues when it comes to, you know, charging stations and all those things. And who will make that investment? Who will make the investment for a solid fossil-free grid that provides a charging station for a city of the size of Bombay? What is the cost of that? And if there are no political incentives and there are no subsidies and there's nothing in it for the consumer, but paying more for taking electric vehicle, I think that's a difficult thing to do. So I think we working very closely, not only with grid, but also with all those charging station, gas station that has to have a new type of business model. So I think we're really in the balance now. What will be the way forward, and how could also the global community say to those countries who are a little bit more challenged when it comes to this type of investment, why don't we put more effort into that part when it comes to development? We also spoke with Ganesh on Friday about, you know, the situation in the city is one thing, and then also they have the connection between cities. What type of highways are we going to build in the future? Will those only be, you know, asphalt and then you got to continue to drive your big trucks? Or will we actually make an investment to put charging station along that line? And what type of technology do we want? ABB has always been for open standards. We provide to all companies, car companies, and we have one charging system, pantographs, that we use for buses in cities that actually makes it, you know, also affordable in time. Because you have to remember, these buses that goes around the city has to be charged somewhere, and usually quite a long distance. So we thought that if we can charge them at every 2 or 3 stations for maybe 20 seconds or 40 seconds, then we actually can have the buses running all day long. So I'm really humble about this question, but the only way we can be successful is to take a bold step together, do the investments, and cooperate with all levels of society. And then with time, we will also, as a company, try to make more affordable innovation. But the problem for us is usually, the problem is not the technology, is how we are able to implement it. Due to, you know, plans of the city planners are not there, it's too complicated, we have to, so all these things we have to work in conjunction, and it sounds very messy, which it is, but I think that's why we have these type of collaborations together. And usually the most successful cases we have in Sweden has not been one company to the other, it has been together with the mayor, with the city of Göteborg, demand from students saying, why do we have to go with buses that are on diesel? And then all of a sudden you have a solution saying, this is the way forward. So it sounds a little bit hallelujah maybe, but I think that's the only way. We have to collaborate. But if we don't have a vision, Soma, I think that it's, every time I go on something that is fossil, it's not a good thing, it's a need. But the vision has to be, I don't want to sit in a bus that's driven on you know, Euro 3 or Euro 4 standard. I, as a future citizen or citizen of this place, I want something different for myself. That's the pressure that everybody can be doing in the society, and somebody has to communicate that message. And it's usually, we can do it, but usually it has to come from the political side. So that's what I love about this job. I had that background, and I sit as a business talking to people like Albin and Ganesh maybe about what could be done about this. So we're there to communicate and to be a platform for others. And I don't have a great answer to it, and it's just muddle through, but you need the vision.
I don't think anyone has answers here. It's just a discussion between an 80-person wide family, and to discuss what can be done. Of course, with that, and of course, partnership and collaboration becomes a repeated slogan in today's discussion and becomes more important than ever before. But you have Ganesh with Tata Power on the ground dealing with these at the front line. What's your response to the question of electric, luxury, ambition, vision?
See, what I fully, you know, endorse what Jakob has been saying. And, you know, as we say in literature, there is a very different way to present everything. And end of the day, we could arrive at the same solution or conclusion. But what I would say is, what is very important is, one more thing, you know, the dynamics which we are observing is, the price of oil is also going down drastically. So the kind of calculation we used to do for electric vehicle on per kilometer, etc., that is also going to change drastically. And at the moment, the government, there is not much pressure on the government to reduce the price of petrol or diesel, because we are focusing on some other things. The moment we get out of this, then there will be a lot of pressure on the government also to reduce the price of the oil also. So that is one side which is going to happen. As we classically say, using the Michael Porter's model, is in a substitution, the role rivalry and the substitution play into the scenario. That is something which we have to know. Actually, this is something which can happen only through a very strong partnership. And how does this partnership look like? If you look at the role this utility has been playing in India, we can talk about the losses and everything as a distribution company. So we'll be taking over a distribution company in Odisha also shortly. And we were about to do it from April, but it got delayed. But what is going to happen is we have to really decide that what are the things the state has to do and what are the things the consumer or the other ecosystem and their partners has to do. And since it relates to a infrastructure, and if you look at across anything around the world, if you look at railways, if you look at airlines, it has started with some strong government interventions and government created models. And subsequently, they have let that model go and get diverse into privatization, get people ready, reduce the risk around that model, and then get other people to slowly get confidence. Then you have the small industry, medium industry, micro industry coming in, startups coming in. So you have to actually, not only talk about the path, but also decide that how this industry is going to progress. And why this is important is, this is going to disrupt not only the industry of automotives per se, but you look at the entire chain of the business it is going to disrupt. Like for instance, another example is, today we are struggling to get people to pay the electricity bills. I'm talking about the domestic consumers. So there suddenly, there are a lot of pressure which is going to come in. So how this model is going to work? What we feel is, what I personally feel is, electricity, the infrastructure is set up by the utilities. And we also have a very strong advocacy for the carriage and content getting separated, retail getting separated in India. Still, we are struggling on that. Of course, the electricity amendment is also, there are some thoughts which are being discussed on that. So what is important is the infrastructure, I feel, has to be created by the distribution companies, because the dependence on the grid is very, very high. What I mean by infrastructure is, I'm not saying that they will put up the charging stations. The entire network, we should be capable of addressing the requirement of electric vehicle and the interface of the grid with the charging infrastructure, with the automotive consumers, the consumer requirements, the freedom which is to be given to the consumers to really decide when to charge, when to discharge, etc., has to be looked at. Now, what this lockdown has also told us and got us to learn is, the generating stations, which is far off, you have a challenge of doing something. Is it some way that we can actually move toward the distributed energy resources, typically with a combination of solar storage, demand response, and electric vehicle coming in together? So we, instead of creating very large network, can we create smaller network? Maybe possible in some places, may not be possible, but can we reduce the dependency of the largest central grid to a distributed centralized grid, which will have a local control over what is going to be happening at the charging level, solar generation level, or any other renewable level, or get consumer to participate through demand response and things like that, get consumer to participate on investing on the solar rooftop. And possibly, is it some way that we can move some element of investment from the distribution companies to at the customer side? Because consumer has been investing on gensets, they've been investing on the home appliances, they've been investing on the storage batteries like inverters in the company. Can we decide that some parts can be transferred to the consumer, wherein the consumer has a choice to operate and has a freedom to decide what he wants to do, at the same time be a part of the grid to do that? Can we, typically we define them as consumers, but I'm saying that more than the consumers, they are actually going to be real actors in the grid, which is not only going to decide on the consumption, but also can help in the demand and also help to manage the grid in a more dynamic way. So can we see some sort of, or do we see that kind of a change which is going to happen? So the prominent thing what I would say is, what sort of a long-term business model we are aiming at? And can we have some sort of a consensus? We have this mission innovation, initiative of Government of India, mission innovation countries. Of course, Sweden is also part of that. And then can we, even, I mean, at a smaller level, can we look at the mission innovation? Of course, there are certain things which goes on in that. We look at to develop a business model wherein a state invest in a larger way, or possibly create some sort of a mechanism, finance or otherwise,
Yes,
to
I'm
really
actually going to
de-risk
jump.
some sort of element and do that.
I'm going to jump in because I think you're stealing Albin's thunder, because you're answering exactly the question he might be asking you a little bit later. So hold that thought, because I want to come back to Soma. And I also want to highlight that we have the CEO roundtable between SIBC and CII's Secretariat between Sweden and India, where these questions can be taken up in a government-private sector participation format with R&D as well. But Soma, you've heard some of the responses from the panelists, looking at the role of government and the role of business to kind of take forward ambition. You have the ear of the government. What will you be saying to them?
Okay, so one thing which I think will be important going forward to do any of the things which Ganesh mentioned is to actually address the weakest link of the power sector, which is the distribution sector. The distribution sector is largely state-owned. Very little of it is private-owned. We have, I think, 11% which is only owned by the private sector. Ganesh company Tata runs one or two of those distribution centers, but most of it is state-owned. And like I mentioned in some of the figures, they are very badly financially very, very badly off. So the first thing we need to do is to really restore the financial health of the distribution companies. And I'm happy to say that I think they're really making a crisis into an opportunity. The government has come out with a plan to infuse at least around 85,000 crore into the distribution segment. So it's like a bailout package again. But what is important is this time they have said it's output based. So if only you take certain reforms, we give you the money. So for instance, milestones are linked onto smart meters, onto tariff revisions, which is very important because like what Ganesh said, tariffs in India are very, very, very lopsided. You have the industry tariffs, which are not only paying for the rural and the domestic consumers, but even more. So as a result, it's important to rationalize the tariffs. It's important for industry to be paying a lower amount, definitely lower than what they pay now. And that is one of the milestones which has been linked to the distribution reforms, which is in the play and should be out maybe within 10 days. A cabinet is supposed to take a decision on this. And I think that will strengthen the distribution companies to take decisions which will help. There is also a big effort to bring in the private sector into the management of distribution companies. So various models are being talked about where the private sector takes over management of the distribution companies. Again, I think a very welcome step because unfortunately for India at least, the power sector has been more of a political hot potato and it's often tossed around by chief ministers and the rest when elections come. So it's important to have that distance and to have the distribution sectors managed by the private sector. If actually we can get through with all of these, we will see a much more robust and a commercially run distribution company. Now, once the distribution company starts being run commercially, I think such judgments or such movements, as Ganesh said, where people start making a pressure of the kind of power they want, of the kind of grid they want, etc., start making a play. The only one, and I know I'm the only negative person maybe on the panel, everybody seems to be pretty positive. The only constraint which I think will play out in the short term is the economy. We can't forget where the economy is. And the fact that you're talking of subsidies, the fact that you're talking of help from the government, which did come out in the FAME 2 policy, where the government gave capital subsidies to automakers who are getting into electric vehicles. Whether that kind of a dose can come yet again, just very soon, it's an open question at this point. I think the fiscal pressures are very large. I mean, the government has not yet come out with an economic package, unlike most countries, because of these problems. And so at this point, it comes back to your question, Arati, on luxury. Automakers are saying they're not going to see a revival in auto demand, ICE engines, till 1 year, 2 years, maybe 1 year definitely. And they are already having invested in Euro 6, which is now there in the whole country. So they are saddled with inventory of Euro 4, which was to be exhausted by March 31st, which could not be exhausted, and those losses will have to be absorbed by them. I don't know who's going to buy those cars. They may be just scrapped. Now they have Euro 6, but there is no demand for automobiles anymore. So at this juncture, can we make the leapfrog? I wouldn't even say it's just jump starting or moving ahead and moving into electric vehicles. I think it'll all depend on the cost. The pricing is going to be very important, and I think there the battery makers are going to be the game changers. If they can really bring in prices down, maybe because of volumes, as you said, Jakob, which we've seen in the case of LED lighting in India, if that is possible. And I have hope there, because we had a bid for Renewable, which was with battery for the city of Delhi, and they actually competed with a Renewable with gas. So that means something is happening somewhere. Battery prices have come down somewhere. If we can catch on to that, if we can really bring the battery prices down and we can provide a price that is affordable, there is a future in the near term. I don't know if I've answered your question. Just try it.
Thank you, Soma, and thank you all panelists. Just to round up before we move into all of the interesting Q&A, I would like to challenge you for one final time. As mentioned, we have a call coming up between Sweden and India in the space of smart grids and electromobility. And we want projects that are close to market that can be rolled out, and perhaps they can be one small contribution to the tricky situation that we are in right now. So just very, very briefly, I would like each one of you panelists to come with your input. What does this call need to focus on? Which projects would you like to see from where you are sitting? And I would like to start with Jakob and ABB, if that's all right with you, Jakob.
Certainly. Can I just go back to Ganesh and Soma's really interesting topic? I mean, where we are right now is the world is in enormous crisis mode, and I mean, we are rolling out programs in Sweden we haven't seen since forever, I think. There's a question: who is the government doing anything? Yeah, we are subsidizing thousands of workers who otherwise would be unemployed, in particular in the automotive industry, Volvo and Volvo cars and so forth, and all the sub-suppliers to that. So obviously there will be a tremendous drop in demand. And what will happen to those cars that used to be Euro 6 that could now be hybrid? What will happen with the last generation? And I also seen that India is now actually going to a Euro 6 standard. So I think we have to be very, humble where we are. Ganesh has pointed to a structural problem here, where oil prices are dropping to levels we thought were unthinkable, really unthinkable. We had even a minus at some point for a barrel, and because of lack of storage. And what will that do to the price? And will the government or anybody else be able to balance that drop in price? And that will also mean that it becomes so much easier and cheaper to use fossils for energy consumption and for energy production. So will this squeeze out new greenfield projects in the green sector? Let's hope not. And I think this is something that we just, once we get a little bit further down the road in this crisis and we can start to reopen our societies, what type of investment will we do? We would take the shortcut and say, well, maybe we should just stick with this for a while because the situation was so poor. And maybe that's needed because we had such a tremendous downturn in the socioeconomic impact. Or do we say, well, we're going to live here long term on this planet, so we need to do what is the right thing to do. So I think this is really, you have to strike that balance between safety, society, and the long-term goal of having a planet that we want to live in. So I think what we always strive to do, Albin, when it comes to project, is to find projects that are they don't have to be top-notch. I think one of the most important things is to find standards. Standards brings down the cost. It's open for everybody, not only for the established type of actors and big car companies, or bus companies, but also for new players. So I think working with standards, what type of standards will India have? What type of standard will Sweden have? Also look into, when it comes to innovation, charging has to be fairly fast. We don't have 2 hours to sit at McDonald's to wait for the cars to be charged. So I think we have to look into that. And then it goes into the grid. We have to have stable grids. So maybe not so fancy type of projects here, Albin, but rather to look at projects that are, solid, open source, bringing in new players. And then I know, Ganesh, we talked about this thing with highways. I'm really interested to see whether a country like India could build new highways that already from the outset, when we are looking at them, could they be, even a global role model? This is how a developed country in that brink of becoming a developed country can build something that is affordable. Perhaps together with us, together with Volvo and Tata Motors and so forth. Could we do something there? That would be very, very, very cool.
Well received, Jakob. Thank you very much.
But can I just interrupt? Sorry, I'm really sorry, but we have 4 more minutes, so then the panelists can finish. And there are a number of questions that we've received. And to everyone that's asked a question, we will follow up with the panelists after this session and feedback to you individually. Sorry, we cannot take it up here. Albin, back to you.
All right, got it. And back to you, Ganesh, then I would like to ask you the same question. Are there any specific type of projects that you would like to see happening in this call? You have already touched upon a great number of areas where you see potential for development.
I think, one of the things which we have to really insist on is we have to look for a solution which needs to be scaled up. Typically, what I've seen in this kind of calls is you do something, with a combination of academics and industry and demonstrate something, and it stays there. So here the key thing would be that, can this be, it is suppose we come out with a model, we don't mind spending say 5 million or 50 million in spending on a research. But when the product cost has to be very, very cheap, it should be in couple of dollars or couple of euros. So the scale up becomes much cheaper, and the money we spend on arriving at a solution is something should give an output which is very easy to replicate, and it is cost effective, because that is very important for the Indian situation coming up. And I think one of the important area to also look at is this call should also perhaps try to understand how do we make the second use of batteries very practical. Because the moment we do that, what will happen is we are going to extend the life of the cost of the electric vehicle, not only up to the life of the car or when it has been used, but also it is going to be used as a storage, which is going to get into the grid. And fortunately, and you're going to have a classical integration of smart grid with electric mobility when you're going to do that. And smart grid is going to remain despite the fact that whatever you do with the usage, somebody may choose to buy a car or not buy a car, but smart grid or the grid is going to remain. So maybe a combination of how do we really use some of the things like the second use of battery in a practical situation of a smart grid would be interesting to look at, and how do we really arrive at a solution to look at. The point is, there are so many things we can talk. Just in the interest of time, we should really look for solutions which are scalable, which may take a little bit expensive to develop, but end of the day, it should scalable and which could be shared by many people very easily to replicate. I would put it this way.
Thank you, Dr. Ganesh. And over to you finally, Soma, from where you are sitting, where would you like to see projects?
So I would say 3 areas, and these are areas which are, I think, which are COVID neutral, if I may use the word. COVID or no COVID, you can definitely work on these areas. One, of course, is R&D. I think both Ganesh as well as Jakob hinted at that. Definitely investments and more weightage to R&D. The private sector can do its R&D. The government can incentivize R&D through tax incentives. It is time really to work on R&D so that we get the solutions, and once we get the solutions, to really scale it up. So that's one, and R&D particularly to do with battery. The second area, which I think is most important, is laying down the infrastructure. And why I say this is, and when I say infrastructure, I mean basically the charging infrastructure. Why I say this, today the charging infrastructure is primarily being done by government. Now, if I look at it, Today is the time when you want to create jobs. Today is the time when you want to create livelihoods. Today is the time when you want to lay down the infrastructure. As we all know, when we come to these debates of whether it should be the car first or the infrastructure first, whether you should have the gas first or the pipeline first, whether you should have the power first or the transmission line, this is the time. Cars are not going to come tomorrow, but you can lay down the infrastructure. You can put up this charging infrastructure. It will create the jobs. It will create the infrastructure you need. So that 2 years down or 1.5 years down, when the cars really start rolling, no car is stopped, or no car has to think that I don't have a charging infrastructure to charge my battery when I go down the lane. This is the period we can do that. And it can be done by the state-run companies, which is good even to create jobs which you need at this time. And thirdly, Jakob hinted at it and Ganesh also spoke, I think the highways. Again, a very big emphasis area for road building. Again, it is, it is to do with long-term. And it is something which COVID or no COVID, India will need to build. So I think the 3 areas which I spoke about are areas which I feel will be relatively not impacted by COVID, which are essential if we want to really get in a new mode of transport and a more greener way of transport. And that is where I would think collaborations are needed. Governments need to work as well as the private sector.
Very clear. Thank you very much. We have a lot to work on together here throughout the coming months to make good projects happen. Over to you, Arati, to close.
Great. We've just gone 1 minute over time. Hopefully the Zoom window won't close on us. I want to thank all the panelists very much for taking the time to be here and to share with our audience what thoughts you have on the conditions that we are undertaking right now and what everyone is doing to actually move forward. We actually have a panel tomorrow, same time, same place, on the mobility as a service model. We have a lot of startups on the call talking about some of the challenges that have been raised today. So if you can, audience as well as panelists, please join us. But thank you so much for being here. And we will be sending you the questions offline. We can't take them here. Sorry for that, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe. Let's be in touch. Lots to do.
Lots to do. Bye-bye.
Thank you.